2,000 years ago, when the first Christians began to preach the gospel in the Roman Empire, they had to go through a very hard time. In the Roman society, and even much more in today's modern society, there were many things which clash with the high moral standards of our Christian faith, with the values of the gospel. For example, there was a very great disrespect for human life. Just imagine about 1/3 of the total population consisted of slaves. Abortion was normal, so was divorce and adultery. Homosexual relations, acts of cruelty, and other vices were practiced on a very large scale. And most of all, many of the Roman emperors claimed the right to be worshipped as a god. That is idolatry. How could the Christians agree with that? Thus, it is not surprising that the Christians at first were not at all so warmly welcomed. On the contrary, for more than 250 years, they were persecuted. People of every age, people of every social class, every position in the church, from the popes to the bishops to the deacons, to laymen and women people, people of every part of the empire lost, sacrificed their lives for the sake of Jesus, for the sake of their Christian faith. And yet, Christianity grew very fast. Without power of arms, without financial means, without political pressure to back it up, it grew. Why? What made them so attractive? That they seemed to grow faster the more they were oppressed. What made them tick? What was the secret fire of the early Christians? There may be many answers, but one thing is clear. The first Christians were very convincing. They were credible witnesses in the eyes of the pagans. They did not cling to their religion out of a mere sense of duty. Like for us, Sunday is an obligation. Not only because they were afraid to go to hell, not because they hoped to get some temporary favors in return. No. Very simple. They were simply fired up with love for God. Theirs was a totally Jesus-driven life. Jesus-driven life. There was another reason. They make an equally deep impression on the pagans. They were also fired up with love for their neighbors. And so we find these words written by historians. The pagans exclaim, "Look how they love one another. They look after the poor." Some martyrs died with a prayer for their enemies on their lips. And during the outbreaks of the plague at Alexandria, Christians tended the sick and buried the dead when nearly everybody else has fled from the city. So never ever the pagans, the non-Christians have seen such a thing before. Such a brotherly love, such a sincere compassion. The community was so friendly, so welcoming. So it is not surprising that at the sight of such a testimony, many non-Christians felt deeply moved, inspired to join this vibrant Christian community. The history of the early church is the great and heroic history. The memory of it, if you like, read the Acts of the Apostles, should inspire us deeply. It should make us wonder, what about us today? Many centuries have passed since, and our church has grown older. We might have gained a lot of experience. Of course, we have increased in numbers. But have we also been fired up with the Spirit? Do we have the fire, the enthusiasm to inspire us to love God with our whole heart, mind, and soul, and love our neighbor as ourselves? Matthew 22. And in the next verse, Jesus said, the whole law and the prophets are founded on these two commandments: love God and love of neighbor. So the early Christians simply lived that. The God, the Pentecostal fire, the God of fire and the cross. Have you heard of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous? It is a fellowship of men and women to help one another to recover from alcoholism. The success of AA is generally credited to the simplicity of its 12-step program, whose credo is love and service. And in a speech to a gathering of AA members, the founder, Dr. Pope, reminded them of the simplicity that had brought them so much success. He says, we understand what love is. We understand what service is. So let's bear those two things in mind. And then his closing remark. And one more thing. None of us would be here today if somebody had not taken time to explain things to us, to give a little pat on the back, to take us to a meeting or two, or to do numerous little kind and thoughtful acts on our behalf. So let us never get such a degree of a smug complacency that we are not willing to extend or attempt to extend to our less fortunate brothers the help which has been so beneficial to us. So sisters and brothers, can we together rebuild SFA into a welcoming, vibrant community of missionary disciples like the early church? And I ask, why not? But only with the power of the Pentecostal fire. Without that, nothing will happen. And like the AA, our success will depend on the simplicity of intensive or radical living of the cross. That's all. Remember, I shared before, in every Mass, we make 5 times the sign of the cross, or even 7 times, if you include the one you make when you enter or leave the church, at the beginning and end of the Mass, and before the Gospel 3 times. So you don't mind me repeating the cross. Vertical dimension, love of God. Love God. For us is habit 1 and 2. We love God. Daily prayer and daily Bible reading. And the horizontal dimension, love of neighbor. Habit 3, loving relationship and loving service. As simple as that. And this is the living cross. And Jesus says, if you do not take up your cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. So the early Christians simply lived the cross. That's how the church become vibrant. They got the Pentecostal fire, the fire and the living cross. And it's very challenging to live the cross. It's very difficult to love. You have to die to my ego, die to our selfishness, die to our pride, die to our like or dislike, and so on. Focus on Jesus. It's very challenging. Love one another as I love you. Very difficult. As simple as that. Live the living cross. I use the word living cross, not the wooden cross. The wooden cross only reminds us. That is a basic discipleship, the first 4 habits. And so Pope Francis told the cardinals who had just elected him as Pope, he says, when we walk without the cross, when we build without the cross, when we profess Christ without the cross, we are not disciples of the Lord. Sisters and brothers, God, in His divine mercy, has blessed SFA with 2 special gifts. First, the gift of a big, beautiful, and attractive church. And the other one, the gift of fire and the 8 habits. The fire and the 8 habits will be our tool to rebuild and transform SFA into a vibrant community of missionary disciples like the early church. Amen. So let it be.